And I am a big believer that things happen for a reason. People meet people for a reason. And so I went in to interview, took a humongous pay cut, and very different than engineering, and got into gaming. I think I had like two things on the like must have list on the job description, which was I could travel 50% of a month and I had a college degree.
Hey guys, welcome to the How I Got Here podcast. I'm your host, Travis Waters, and I designed this podcast to share stories that are worth telling, whether it's about somebody going from zero to hero, hero to zero, or simply something in between. On today's episode, we talked to Melissa of Executive Connect, learn about how her early interest in wanting to become a doctor, maybe even a singer, transformed into a lot of math-heavy things with banking and engineering that all led her to where she is today. Let's go ahead and jump into our conversation with her now. Enjoy. Hey guys, welcome to the How I Got Here podcast. I'm your host, Travis Waters, and on this episode, we are joined by my new BFF, Melissa of Executive Connect. Now, for those that may not know you by name or by face, let's start off with a quick 15-second high-level overview of what you're up to right now in 2026.
Ooh, that's a lot. 15 seconds. All right, let's
You're
do
already
it.
5 in, so you have 10 left now.
Well, as you mentioned, I am the host and founder of the Executive Connect podcast. We're going on year 2, almost 3 of the podcast. And I am an author of Renaissance Redefining Success for Modern Mavericks. And I am an EVP of strategy and growth for a company called DrewStar, where we focus on cybersecurity and AI in the gaming industry. How'd I do? 15 seconds.
14 and a half. You nailed it. Perfect. So how we always like starting these episodes off with is you tapping into the earliest memory banks of as far back as you can recall, the very first time that you had either I have interest in doing this when I grow up, or I have interest in this right now that can become something when I'm older. Anything that's around the I want to do this or I like this potential career opportunity as early as far back as you can go. And then roughly what age were you when you came to that first interest?
So I always thought, Travis, I was going to be either a doctor or B, a pop music singer. So those were my earliest memories at 5 years old. But funny enough, at the same time, I used to get money from my parents, or sometimes joke around, take money from my mom's purse because she liked to carry cash. And I would always borrow their money and invest it into things that I wanted later. So I'd essentially spend their money and save my own money. So it's kind of an interesting first memory at being 5, because today I would say now I've invested in many different things with my money, a lot of different alternative investments.
Why not be a pop singing doctor? Is that something that crossed your mind back then?
Yes.
Yeah, I was like, it probably
I,
did.
yes,
Uh,
I think it's really, really funny. How do I say this? Pop singing doctor. Well, it's really funny because, correlate the podcast to being a pop star. I don't know. But, health and wellness has always been a priority in my life too. So there's something to all this, what happened in your earlier age that you can recall. Because, you know, I've kind of been doing all of it to some extent.
there's a lot of special golden nuggets that I have came across now. This being the 44th episode of the How I Got Here podcast. One of them, which comes into play kind of where we're at so far in the early part of this episode, is it's interesting that as grandiose as the storylines of some of my guests are in terms of going from where they started to where they are, they've never spent that time that I've been able to spend with them in terms of recalling the entire path that got there. So on the subject of you matching what you're doing now with the pop singing and with the doctor stuff, I've actually had some like eureka moments with my guests where they're like, oh, because I bring up like, oh, that what you're doing now is kind of like this thing that you thought about when you were 7, and they've never made that connection themselves. And I don't know. I just there's always some special moments that happen in this show, and that's one of the ones that I like when they come to fruition. So I know that you are not currently, to my knowledge, a pop singer. Not anything on YouTube that I've been able to recover thus far, and uh, that being the first interest, how long did that last before something else took over this is what I want to be when I'm older?
Well, once I found out how many years you had to go to school to become a doctor, I think that was an eye opener for me. And the cost of medical school, maybe that too. That's a great question. I would say, probably maybe until I got to high school. I got my first job pretty young, babysitting for a family, worked as in the bank, worked in banking really young. And so once I got that job, I think I kind of pivoted into thinking that I was going to be either in banking or in engineering. So let's say junior high to high school timeframe.
What was it about what you were doing, watching, or participating in during that time that brought you to that banking slash engineering interest?
I just happened to babysit for two different men that are, they both were like, you're so responsible. The other one's like, you're really good at math. You should look at these two careers. And so one of them actually both of them, I ended up working for one of the engineering firms for a man I babysat. He was a partner at one of the civil firms. And then another family I babysat for, he was an executive at the time at Bank of America. And so he kind of helped me get into the banking space before most people kind of make their segue into that space. So I had kind of both of them going at the same time. So when I was in college as a freshman, had already interned at a civil firm in the summer, and during college, I was working part-time at a bank, being a teller and a customer service rep.
So, what for the 4 years of high school? Excuse me. What was the catalyst that helped you choose what your I guess what your degree was going to be? Was it did you because I know you said early on you did babysitting a little bit junior high, the kind of that I don't know, what's that, like a 13, 12, 13 year old time frame, maybe a little bit older than that. And then you had these two individuals in different careers, kind of, I don't want to say like a mentor, but some sort of guidance of like, hey, you should might do this. So was the one on the banking side of things, did that just sound more interesting to where by the time, I know you said by the time you got to college, you already had this like internship, but what about what you were doing in that time was like, this is what I'm going to get my degree in? Kind of what solidified that?
Yeah. So similar timelines. I in high school we had the University of Nevada, Reno. I went to high school in Vegas. Um, and UNR would come down to talk to some of the high schools about potentially going to UNR instead of UNLV. And I just happened to be going to the restroom, and a really well-dressed man in a suit said, "Hey, are you good at math?" And I kind of turned around. I'm like, is he asking me? I don't know who he's talking to. I was on the way to the restroom, and I kind of joked, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm kind of good at math. He's like, well, you should come listen to this presentation on the College of Engineering at UNR or something to that extent. And so I ended up going. And funny enough, UNR wasn't really in my top colleges I was planning to go to. Actually, none of the Nevada schools actually were at the time. I was really interested in university in Madison, and then also ASU and a couple of other colleges. And I went in to listen, and I don't know, I just connected and clicked with the dean at the time. And funny enough, I ended up becoming a spokesperson for the school actually because I ended up sharing a little bit about the school with some of my peers in high school. And I actually ended up getting a couple of people I knew to go to UNR. And so it's funny how things happen though, right? And so I started at UNR. I had great scholarship there. I had scholarship for the other schools for athletics and academics. So I had a dual scholarship for several different schools. But I chose UNR. I really love the campus. I love the professors. And I ended up getting kind of a dual engineering degree in 4.5 years and a few minors. And I loved going to college there.
Going back to that incident where somebody stopped you and asked you about math, was the I think what you say, it wasn't a speech, was it like a job fair almost, I guess?
Exactly. It was that. Exactly.
Did Was it going on at the time where he's like, "Hey, you should come next door. There's something going on," or was he inviting you for like a future date?
That's a good question. I don't know if I remember. I think it was happening at that time or later in the day, maybe in the afternoon, and ran into him during lunch or something. But he was definitely on campus to talk that day to the school.
So you go to the event, sparks between you and R happen. You go there, you eventually become the spokesperson, or one of the faces, recruitment faces, if you will, and then you finish with a lot of paperwork, or a lot of achievements, I guess you can say at the end. You said a dual major and a bunch of minors. Is that right?
Yes. Funny how I got a dual and some minors. It's actually quite an interesting story. So I was absolutely set on getting my engineering degree in 4 years. I wanted to be in and out of college. Now looking back at that, I wish I took the like 5 year plan or maybe even the 6 year plan at college. But at the time, I was so set on getting a degree in 4 years. I was so set on this that I was taking, mind you, I had a part-time job. I was in a sorority running and playing sports for UNR, and I was getting a civil engineering degree and taking max class load in college. And so in the summers, I was coming back to Vegas to work at the engineering firm, and I was doing summer school. All the classes I couldn't stand doing during the school year, I would take in the summers if they'd offer them. And so, as I was getting to kind of finishing college, my junior year, I was going through everything, and I was talking about getting starting an MBA my senior year, and I was sitting with the counselor, and they figured out that I didn't have enough classes to graduate in 4 years. So I was going to have to stay for another semester. And so I decided if that was the case, I was just going to, get a dual because these ones counted for that. The minors counted for my MBA program. So I just kind of continue to crank up the class load and take summer school my junior year so I can graduate. Hindsight and looking back, I don't know what I was thinking. Like nobody asked me on my first job, Travis, what was your GPA and what were your minors? Like none of that ever was part of the interview process, but I did graduate top of my class and so looking back to any of, the listeners, enjoy college. It's one of the only times in your life once you get the job, it's like the real world, right? Working, working. And so I wish I had taken more time to enjoy college. And not that I didn't enjoy college. I probably could have, accepted those front stage Metallica tickets instead of saying I can't go because I had a test the next day.
It's very interesting on the looking back on things and being like, hey, like I wish I would have milked that for all it's worth. Because again, I mean, not saying that. I mean, you can essentially, if you wanted to, go back to college and do something else, but that's not the same. I understand what you're saying. For me, on my end, it was. It's interesting that you had that goal of I'm going to accomplish this in 4 years. And even as you were having fun and enjoying life during college, you never swayed from that like initial goal of I want to accomplish this in 4 years. Because for me, it was kind of the same thing, but it wasn't necessarily a timeline. It was just get me out of school because I did not enjoy. There were a lot of pros and cons to high school and middle school and college and everything, and I think for me it was just more cons. So I was like, please, just I want to get me to the real world as soon as possible. But yeah, I'm sure like looking back, there's probably more things I could have done differently to enjoy my time during the degree. But uh, back to the chronological timeline real quick. So I know that you said that you had an internship, I think even before you started um, at UNR, but when were you doing other internships during these many different degrees and having your toes dipped in a lot of different pools at the same time?
No, I'm, a loyal creature. I stayed with the bank. The bank gave me scholarship. The engineering firm, I had that job year round. They, when I'd come back for Christmas break, I'd work a little bit during Christmas break with them and, random stuff. I really enjoyed working there. I thought, the experience for me was awesome. I think back in the day, I was doing hydraulics and hydrology at 17. And now that same area, I was doing hydraulics and hydrology. If you know anything about Vegas, that was what is now called Summerlin, a big part of Vegas. And so I kind of helped do a lot of the master planning out there with the civil engineering firm I worked for. And, personality, the man that I had gotten the job from, he was kind of the business guy. He brought in a lot of their deals, negotiated a lot of their contracts. At the time when I was babysitting for him, MLMs were like a popular thing. He was also a diamond at Amway back when Amway was like one of the um, hardest companies to become, whatever the top was. I think it was diamond back then, but I'm not 100%. But he was so influential on my life. And I'll tell you this little nugget. He passed far too young. He was in his 50s, early 50s, and he had a heart attack on the way to an event. And one of the things that I learned, and I've always been athletic, I've always kind of taken care of my health, is watching so many of my mentors. I would tell you almost all of my, mentors in my 20s and younger, all of them are deceased to date. And I watched one after the other just pass away. And a lot of it was for things we talk about, like burnout, not sleeping, taking care of your health, checking your heart, checking your, all those things. And I look at, even now, right, I get really passionate about what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing. And so it's so easy to work, work, work and go, go, go. But I always kind of try to think back to those mentors. So many of them lost their lives because they were not taking care of their health. They were really focused on their wealth. And so, if I can leave anything with anyone, kind of health and wealth should be kind of chucking along next to each other. It shouldn't be kind of completely skewed as we're, building our best lives.
Yeah, the I think I don't know what the idiom or the cliche is, but along the lines of like building wealth. What's the use of building wealth if you're not alive to use it essentially? So yeah, definitely a balance there that's necessary. So the story is very interesting to me because I my favorite part again also of doing these is that I'm every episode I'm learning something new for the first time because rarely in whether it's business relationships or just common industry or just regular friendships, if you will, it's very rarely of meeting someone that you go into like their entire past. So all these stories, I hope that the people listening and that watch like enjoy learning, whether they know you already or not, just learning something for the first time. And so back on I always call it the chronological train. Back on the chrono train. Uh, so you did a lot of stuff during college. You've had a lot of experience in the real world while still doing all this stuff in college. You then graduate. Did you, because of the relationships that you built during this time, did you already have like that guaranteed day one after college job set up, or did it take you a while to figure out what you wanted to do after?
It's funny. I laugh. I don't think I've applied for one job. Like this is gonna sound so goofy when I say this story because the one job I applied for, I worked for the company for 14 years and I just left last year. I applied for the job, but I applied for the wrong job and I wasn't supposed to apply for that job. But my job after, yes, I was guaranteed the job after, to answer your question. Yes, I had the job after I graduated. Funny thing happened though. I loved living in northern Nevada. I am an outdoors kind of gal. Loved boating. I loved boarding. I loved water surfing. I loved that I can drive to Napa Valley. I can hit Oregon. I really fell in love with Reno. And that was the catalyst for me not taking the full-time role back in Vegas. So I ended up not going back to Vegas. I think it was 11 years later. I ended up going back to Vegas. Um, and so I ended up staying, and so many of my friends were working in finance that I ended up working and back in finance. So I graduated with engineering. With an engineering degree, I had the civil job, and I decided to do and go into a completely different space. So I was doing mortgages and worked in banking. And so I decided not to pursue engineering. Funny enough, funny thing happened in 2007. The economy shifted pretty badly. And so, actually, I think it was in 2006. I got the job back in engineering. 2006, 2007 timeline, I got back into engineering. So I went from banking mortgages back into engineering. And that's all of these jobs that I've had kind of ping ponging back between engineering and finance were all through my network. Like I was a structural civil engineer for Sierra Pacific Power in Reno, which is Northern Nevada, which is now NV Energy, Northern and Southern Nevada merged. And I had a job to go back to Vegas to work for them and back to go work for the civil firm. And I chose to stay up north in Reno and worked for them for a bit. And then I got asked to be and work on one of the largest civil engineering projects at the time, which was a bridge that connected Reno to Carson. It was a $500 million bridge. I was so young. And the man that interviewed me had like a stack of resumes like this. And he's like, why should I give you the job? And anywho, I ended up talking him into giving me the job. And I found that from a job that I was in before that. So all these jobs, kind of one person said, you need to go get Melissa. And the next person said, you need to go get Melissa. So all of them were by referral, or people called me, or, someone passed my resume. So I worked for the power company, another civil firm, and then the bridge. And then I ended up getting into gaming after. So kind of ping ponged back and forth a lot.
I know the easy answer to this next question is probably just saying math, but in more detail, if there is any, because you kept going back and forth essentially between the finance side and the engineering side, was there a lot of overlap or any overlap just outside, I guess, like I said, basic just saying math in general, because I know there's numbers involved in both, but did you find that there's more overlap between the two?
No, actually, I think the thing about civil engineering that was so fascinating to me is, you know, when and aside from civil, this is just in general, I see things different, right? When some people, walk by an empty lot, they see the empty lot. I see something completely different depending on where I am. And it's the same thing, whether it's building something or looking at a business I know nothing about. I just see things a lot of times that others don't see. And I think the beautiful thing about banking for me is I just loved finance. I love to see the creativity and in money and making money. And I've had to make it and lose it a couple times. You know, Mainly because I'm a risk taker kind of gal. But I don't know. I don't know if it's the connection to math, but there's so many cool things about wealth that I love, learning about. I've built many hundreds of thousands of homes, but, I understood the money behind it too. Like, not only did I understand kind of, we got to build this thing, I understood, and that also came from, the partner of the civil firm. He was a deal guy. He put deals together, and I was the kid that got to hang. I started babysitting for him when I was 8, by the way. And I just got to learn and see money. And I didn't come from, my father was a carpenter. And so, how he looked at money and how my biological father looked at money. And if you've ever read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that talks a lot about my upbringing. And I ended up starting an MLM business because my rich dad wanted to show me how to run a business and how to build things. And so I had you know, these mentors that, really taught me so much. And, when my first, my engineering mentor dad passed, I ended up meeting another man who owned another very large MLM company accidentally. I just happened to run into him, and he also passed, and his wife to this day is one of my very best friends. And he was a phenomenal mentor about building community. He helped me understand a lot of wealth codes that I thought I understood a whole different level, like next level wealth codes. And he also passed, flipped a kayak, and passed away. And so I've had all of these like amazing, amazing mentors in my life, and a large number of them, in my 20s and younger, they're all passed away. I've buried all of them.
That's some heavy stuff. And then it wasn't
Yeah.
even. It doesn't seem like anybody died of natural causes in those scenarios either. I think you just said flipped a kayak, which is like I'm just picturing the most craziest like whitewater rafting scenario, and I don't know. Anyway,
He
that's
was reaching down to grab something and he flipped it and he couldn't flip it back over. And the crazy part about that, his wife and I were acquaintances, right? She knew he was mentoring me, and I've had dinner, I've been to their house. Um, and we became extreme besties after that. That night that he passed, I was supposed to um, be meeting with him. I used to meet with him over the weekends, and he was one of the toughest. Like my dad was a tough dad growing up, but he was so tough. Like things like if we would meet at a Starbucks and I was looking at the barista or somebody walking in, he would really get me to refocus. He's like, if I'm talking, you're writing. And I'm so grateful for that because so many, my ADD personality, he really got me to focus on my goals in a whole very rigorous, very organized way. And I look at the goals I accomplished under his mentorship. I literally, went to homeless to millions in no time by his mentorship. And I got to meet some really amazing, very known leadership authors through him, and some really powerful money people through him. And I remember the first time I got to meet a number of them, I was just in awe of these people's lives. And so, um, next level stuff.
yeah, definitely having the. I mean, you seem to have quite a handful of different people in that mentorship role, and just having one, I feel like can make the most difference. A lack of guidance is, I feel like a big detriment to someone's growth potential. Not saying that people can't become great things without mentorship, but it definitely helps when somebody's kind of guiding you, or I don't want to say holding your hand, but just guiding you in general. So yeah, you definitely. It seems like you are beyond appreciative of all of the people that kind of gave you that lending hand there. To
I'll tell you to
Go
your
ahead.
point, I'll unpack that a little more. So that was in my personal life. All of these mentors were not people outside of the engineering. Mentor was the only person that I had a mentor in the workplace. And funny enough, I didn't report to him directly. I reported to one of the other partners. So I didn't um, report to him directly. I reported to an actual PE. He wasn't a PE. But it's interesting to me. In the corporate job, I didn't have a lot of people that dropped the ladder for me in my career. I have been somebody who does that a lot for others. I am one of those people that really believes in teaching the youth. I would tell you over the last, I would say 30 plus years of my life, outside of my day job, I am always mentoring or giving to nonprofits, sitting on nonprofits, helping younger kids, going into high schools, teaching younger kids, because I had so many of those people in my life. And so usually I do that, for different groups that don't have the opportunity to have those kind of mentors.
I feel like there's a lot more on the mentorship that we can probably have an entire episode about it because that's such an important part of also being the mentor and the mentoree. I did not to completely jump off topic, but out of curiosity, because you had a lot of time in Vegas and Reno, on a good day, I'm just curious what that drive distance is. And the reason I ask that is because with you being in a similar space to me, I've been in the state of Nevada, specifically Las Vegas, an insane amount of times, more than any other city on the planet outside of the one I live in. And I'm curious because you were kind of, I mean, you're kind of pumping it up as you wanted to stay in Reno and everything with all the outdoorsy stuff. And I'm like, not saying that I've never avoided going to Reno, but is that something that's a drivable distance if I'm spending a weekend there at one of these industry events?
Yes, and yes, and yes. I'm going to tell you to drive slow through the small towns, but there's nothing out there. You just roll through it. I would say I used to make it in 6.5 hours, and that is booking it. 6.5, 7 hours. And now it's probably a solid 8. But I'll tell you, like, how did my life look when I lived up there? So I would put my snowboard in the back of my truck before I was going to work at the civil firm. During winter, I would drop my board on the fresh powder on the hill in Mount Rose Highway. I board down a couple of hills and head into the office. And then in the summers, I'd head into work early because I wanted to get out of work early because I'd put the boat on Lake Tahoe in the evenings and watch the sunset and wakeboard, and just lay out in Tahoe. It's one of my favorite places in the world is Lake Tahoe. And so I lived close by and it was the place to be for me.
Yeah, you said drive slow through the small towns. Is that more on the enjoy the scenery or more on the there's cops everywhere? Like which one of those more so?
Both, right? Okay, so I met one of the most interesting men I've ever met. So he was a cowboy back like at the time. So I remind you, I'm in college at the time. I think I was probably 19, 20. And the deal was my mom would drive me back to Reno for college, and my dad would pick me up from college. So my parents would each get away back and forth. And so my dad is an old kind of history buff. He loved to stop at all the signs when we were kids to read all the billboards. And, my brother and I and my mom were always like, oh my God, not another billboard. And we stopped one time in the middle of nowhere because there was this like handwritten, hand drawn sign that said blue lobsters. And my dad's like, blue lobsters, those aren't, I forget where they're from. They're not a lobster from the United States, wherever his lobster. So we pulled over on the side of the road to talk to this guy in the middle of nowhere on the way from Vegas to Reno. And I don't even know the city we were in. I don't even think it was a city. There was like one gas station, maybe not even a gas station, one gas pump. We ended up spending 2 hours with this man, and every stop back and back, we'd have to stop and see him. He was probably in his 80s, so he had been cowboying around Vegas with all the known cowboys back in the day. And he had some of the most interesting stories, and he was growing these freshwater, it was either lobsters or I was some kind of crustacean. And he was fascinated in the fact that I was studying environmental engineering. So he'd pick my brain about like the water and what he should do. And it was so fascinating. And the sad part about it, right before I graduated, we had gone back and they had closed his farm down because I guess they were illegal in the US or something. It was so sad to me because this man was just like the nicest, just old, wonderful man, just growing his little blue lobsters in the middle of nowhere, Vegas. And we never exchanged numbers. We just, every year we would stop by and knock on his front door and, chat with him about his lobsters. See, and some of them were huge in a year, how long, what can happen in a year. I don't even know. Maybe they were just getting bigger over time. I don't even know if they live that long. But he was such a wonderful man. And I finally, at some point, Travis had to tell my dad, I'm like, hey, let's get back. Let's get up back on the road. We got things to do. And so, but it was so fun driving it. So yes, to answer your question, you could do it. You should do it.
When you first said yes before you went into detail, I was because I haven't pulled it up on a map, so I know that I know geographically, but I don't know our time. And so when you said yes, like okay, so it's like I can rent a car like 3.5 hours, but it seems to be much longer than that.
It's much longer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
maybe
much
I'll just
longer. You,
have
you
you.
could fly.
If you make the if we're going to a conference together in Vegas and you want to go to Reno, I'll hitch a ride with you. I'll do that instead because that's a very expensive Uber ride. I might yeah flying might be cheaper on that side.
Well, and you know what? The only reason I drove it is because I needed my car.
Well yeah.
Otherwise, I would fly. I would drive and fly it. It's a 15-minute flight or something like that. So it's probably cheaper and better to fly it when gas prices are what they are.
So I know the I'll call him Blue Lobster guy. Was picking your brain often on the engineering side, but I wonder if he had picked your brain on the finance side in terms well not just the basic numbers, but like how can I continue to operate without the potential of doing something to get shut down. But it seems like it wasn't even a numbers thing. It's just like I think what the you said like an illegal the type of lobsters was illegal. Is that what you believe?
Yeah, I guess he must have he brought it back from a different country, or I don't know. Maybe literally this man brought it back in the country probably even before there was any kind of rules
Yeah.
about moving, plants that are in a different country and animals. And so and he's in the middle of nowhere, right? And so it was just really sad for me to see that. I understand, the purpose, but it was also really sad to see it because this man had everything he had built, and everything he had owned, he was putting into this Blue Lobster farm.
Yeah, that's and then I guess your first realization is just one of your trips. You just realized that that place was no longer in service or no longer active. You're like, well, something must have happened there.
Yep.
So back on the chronological train, I know right now you said that you kind of went a little bit back and forth on finance side of things and a little bit back on engineering, and then the industry crash around 2007, 2008. You alluded to somewhere around this time is when you first got into gaming. So let's get into that spot there where
Yeah.
what exactly was that year and then how did that happen coming from the background you had prior?
Yeah. So, okay. So I told you most of my jobs had been like, you got to interview Melissa. Um, so, um, 2010 was a really interesting, rough year for me. I had lost, a lot of people in my life that were very good mentors, 29, 2010. Um, and I had decided I was going to move back to Vegas. And we had lost family members and, some of the mentors that we had talked about. Um, and I was applying for a job. A friend of mine was um, someone that was kind of getting me this role in engineering. And so she's like, put together a resume. And when you're in college, you have to put together a resume. It's like a basic resume of what you've done, who you are. And so I put this resume together and I was started to apply for different jobs, was going to start applying for different jobs. And she's like, well, here, apply here. This job's yours. And I applied for the job and it was a role in gambling. And the HR department called me and said, hey, is this Melissa? And I'm like, yes. And they told me the company's name. And I'm like, oh, I think you have the wrong Melissa. And I'm not in gaming. And she's like, no, is this Melissa Aarskaug? And I am a big believer that things happen for a reason. People meet people for a reason. And so I went in to interview, took a humongous pay cut, and very different than engineering and got into gaming. I think I had like two things on the like must have list on the job description, which was I could travel 50% of a month and I had a college degree. And so I ended up staying with that company for 14 years and just left last year.
So over those 14 years, from when the day one responsibilities to last year responsibilities, how much did that shift during that time? And
Pr
what were those type of responsibilities?
Pretty much every year I shifted in some capacity. I was kind of that we can give her this thing, we can give her that thing, gal. I think the role helped, it helped the role that I was engineer brained. I solved problems. It was a time when gaming, there's a lot of things happening in gaming. Actually, I literally just posted about this yesterday on LinkedIn. I had received Washington State tribes and the state regulator as my assigned client. And at the time, we had no relationship with that state whatsoever. We weren't really doing any business in the state because there was a state lab. The tribes weren't doing business with us. The suppliers weren't doing business with us. And so, when I showed up, really nobody wanted to meet with me. And under my leadership, that became one of the most profitable states at the time for the company. And then I ended up passing it on to someone else to lead. But I had responsibility for, everything from, I would say at one point or another, I have touched gaming 95% of the gambling and gaming in the world, either through compliance and certification or cybersecurity and technology or training. So I've been, kind of had my hands in all of it, everything kind of up to delivery. And 6 years in, I had the opportunity to go and lead and build out a division of this company, cybersecurity division of this company in the US. And so I basically was building everything in the US. We didn't have any specific customers as a Canadian company. And I was able to build it at the time. Um, you know, there wasn't a lot of sports betting or iGaming that kind of started dabbling and coming into play later, but we were doing security assessments and audits and things for the gambling industry.
At the very end, which you said it was last year, what was kind of the main crux of your day to day and that role?
So I was trying to think, I was pulling out all of my business cards that I had. I kept like one of all of my business cards and all my different titles and all my different things. But essentially, I was running sales and strategy in the US, and I had Europe at some point. And when I left, I was being refocused back on the suppliers because the suppliers were having some cyber attacks, cyber struggles. And so I ended up being pulled kind of out of Europe and out of tribes. Those were passed to others. And then I was focusing back on the suppliers, which I did actually start my role with some small suppliers as well, not just Washington. I had other states, the Midwest and Washington, and suppliers as well.
I know at the very beginning of this episode, you alluded to the both writing and then podcast host. So, did those both get spurred at the same time? And if not, which one came first? And how did you come to that realization of this is what I want to do as well, on top of everything else you're doing at the time?
Yeah, I had wrote, actually, I have a lot of books written right now, handwritten. I don't even know if I've ever verbally said that out loud, but I'm saying
Ex-
it to you for the first time.
how I got here exclusive, ladies and gentlemen.
There you go. I've got a lot of them written, and they're handwritten. So the books that I wrote, it really started, from my book last year was Renaissance: Redefining Success for Modern Mavericks. And that book was really a catalyst of I kept getting the word like Renaissance in my head. I'm like, what is this word about? What's going on? And then I kept getting asked. I spoke a lot in the industry all over, not just gaming, but I spoke a lot outside my role in gaming to a lot of young girls in engineering and STEM and a lot of groups I was a part of and a lot of communities I was active in. And the same things kept coming up. And is like, even through this podcast, you are hearing me talk about redefining my success, going back this way, pivoting back that way, redefining things here, adding a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But, I had said, Travis, that I was going to publish this book when I hit 30. And I'm like, what do I know in my 20s? Nobody's going to read a book that someone writes in their 20s. And so, I said, okay, when I started writing it in my early 20s, I'm like, I'm going to publish it in my 30s. Well, I got so busy in my 30s that I ended up, building and scaling a company that um, I ended up not publishing it. And then when I got to my 40s, I'm like, I got to publish this book. And it became really clear for me that I needed to publish this book because the same things kept coming up for me when I was speaking, or women in the industry approaching me about, like, oh my gosh, how'd you pivot? You pivoted again and again and again. But it was really the catalyst of being asked a lot of the same questions. And it's back to the mentorship, dropping the ladder, sharing what I know, the tips and tricks and tidbits I know. The podcast was the same thing. I think back to the men and their heart attacks and the things they were having happen. Nobody taught us in the 80s and 90s about burnout and mindset. And there wasn't any of this kind of, you know, I would say back then it was called woo woo or like whatever. I started practicing, Bikram yoga in 2001. And back then that was like super woo woo. All my friends were like, Melissa, you're a track runner gone yogi. That's very woo woo. And so everybody thought I was crazy when I started doing yoga. And so I started the podcast because there were things that I learned that when I shared it with women, it was like a light bulb moment. And I'm like, oh, maybe there's legs to this. And then I talk about another subject, and I'd happen to have a friend that was an expert in that subject. Um, Many friends that are experts in different subjects. I'm like, okay, well, I have another friend that could do a podcast. And so what happened is I finally had a number of friends and mentors just say, Melissa, you got to do this thing. And I'm like, okay, so I've done this thing. And so it started talking about leadership, all the things to networking, building your brand, interviewing, mindset, all those kind of things. And then when you kind of get to that place in leadership where you're a leader, what you are looking for next is not, mindset. You're looking for, what do I do with the money I'm making? So I had a lot of friends and a lot of contacts in wealth management, and many friends that worked, on the stock exchange, many friends that are working in big banks, private equity. And so many of them could not be on the podcast because of their roles, but I have had some of them on the podcast. And so what started as leadership turned to alternative investments in wealth, a lot of which those investments I was investing in. So I wanted to share that from a person that's been there, done that. And then what I was kind of back to my first mentor, he had a heart attack. So you're working hard to get and move up the ladder, then you get the ladder, then you're trying to make more money, your money work for you, and then all of that kind of happens, and then you're like, I need to work on my longevity and my health. So I started bringing in, my wealth friends, people that know a lot about longevity and health, and who keep me healthy. I'd have them on. And so I've kind of crossed into a lot of different sectors, and I work in AI and cybersecurity. I have a lot of rad friends still in engineering to this day. Many of them own very large civil firms now. One owns a very large civil firm in Reno. Many own structural steel firms, lots of different owners that I still talk to. So AI and cybersecurity is something I'm very passionate about. So I bring on a lot of people in my network, experts or friends of mine. I've had to beg to be on the podcast because they're so smart. And they were like, "Oh, fine, she's nagged me enough. I guess I'll get on." But I talk a lot about faith too. I just, believe in sharing what I know with others.
There's a few questions I had from from that. The most easiest, I guess, to well, not even a question, but more of a statement. I don't know if you went to SBC. I don't know how many years ago it was. I want to say three. The keynote speaker was the guy the Catch Me If You Can movie and musical is based on, which I'm probably butchering his name, but I think it's like Frank Abagnale. I think that might be his name. And like to see, I mean, that's I love that movie to death, and that story is so interesting. And then to see him kind of talk about what he, with all of his background, thinks about cybersecurity now in 2020. I don't know what three or four, whatever year it was at the time. Um, there's so much interesting about that where I don't know. I'll probably ask you a trillion questions after the show. Just all these things that popped in my head. But the most interesting thing, which I guess the first part is, do you know if you did you see him or did you go to the SBC by chance? Do you recall?
Trying to remember, possibly. I don't know if I saw him in person. Once it's funny, I started collecting, like I have this bucket next to my desk right here of badges. It's like this big by this big, and they're all like lined in this.
Oh,
And I didn't start collecting them only like 5 years ago. It's amazing how many I have. But funny enough, I'll tell you, I have some friends in the cyber industry that own cybersecurity companies, and one of them has sold that company, very successful cyber company, and he is now in oil and gas, and he is, drilling oil and gas. And so I do see a lot of things changing in cybersecurity. What worked last year is not working this year. There's a lot going on in that space, and so that might be its own episode.
it might have to be. The last thing I was going to say on the Frank side of things is the golden nugget that blew my brain. One of the things he mentioned, he kind of did a nonchalant quiz to the audience. He goes, "What do you think is more valuable, the stolen identity of a billionaire that owns 500 yachts, or of an infant child that was just born yesterday to a low wealth family?" And then everybody's like, "Well, of course the billionaire." He's like, "No, because the billionaire, because they're rich, they understand how to stay rich, and that means they have the protections needed. That if their identity ever gets stolen, it's going to be back within 24 hours. However, you don't know that your day one old infant, his identity stolen until they become 18 and they actually need to start using it. So there's 18 years on this dark web that you can sign up for so many different things under this stolen identity." I was like, man, like that's makes perfect sense, but like that's something you would never think of given that question. And so there's so many. I mean, unfortunately, there's so many interesting things because there's so much chaos and so many ill-willed people out there trying to do things that require that industry to be so important. But the other thing I was going to ask you is, or kind of mention on, is your story of essentially the writing the books and then creating the podcast. I feel like people that lead with the first uh, thought of I want to write a book or I want to do a podcast tend to not have the success that you've had because you started with I'm seeing, like you're saying, you're talking to women in the space and these light bulbs are happening and you're saying, oh, how do I put that in front of more people? How do I get more people to have light bulbs? And that seems to have spurred a lot of these podcast ideas. And when I guess the reason leads the action, those are the best podcasts, those are the best books. On me and my end, so if you're watching this on the YouTube video, I have this kind of YouTube studio set up in this room that I have, and I built it with the intention of getting this podcast to a level where people would actually come to Central Florida and sit on like both ends, and that was the grandiose idea. But I never figured out what the topic was that was gonna grow legs and get people to get to that point. And I thought about it, so I built this current setup. I want to say in like I moved in this house, I would say March of last year. And I was like, man, I got to think of something. I built this YouTube studio, but I have no ideas. And then it came a few months later in July where there was a freak accident that happened that destroyed my lower back. And on that anniversary of that date, for my own users of playerprops.ai, I just did a video of like, hey, here's a little bit about my background. These are the things that have happened that have like I went from hosting Nickelodeon shows to selling vacations for Wyndham resorts to now in the sports betting space. And these are the reasons that happened. This is the freak accident that recalibrated my priorities that led to doing this instead. And then when I kind of rewatched that video when I uploaded on YouTube, I said, I think this is it. I think this is something that people want to see. They want to learn the stories. I don't necessarily want to do something where I interview people in the space and ask them about like, oh, hey, you just raised $10 million. Let's talk about that. Because my friend, also podcast friend in the space, Jesse, with the Betting Startups podcast, he crushes that. And I don't want to recreate something that he's already had success in. So I was like, well, if I had this spur of the moment, oh, I think people are interested in hearing about storylines. And I love that when people are listening, I'm sure your friends are going to tune in and watch this one, that they're probably going to, you probably could have known them for 20 years and there's still going to be some nugget in here that they've never thought to ask and you may have never thought to tell, but just being open about the journey is, it's just it's a nice rewarding part. So now that you're out of that company you spent quite a long time with and you're still kind of on the writing and the podcast side, do you have, is your focus now moving forward heavily into, or solely if you will, dropping that ladder, or are there other things that you're kind of lining up or that you still have interest in dipping your toes into? Sorry, that was
The
very
executive,
long-winded.
no, I love it. The Executive Connect is an entire ecosystem. It's
Yeah.
not just a podcast. It's a lot of different things. And that, really, I don't want to call it a nonprofit because it's not a, 501(c)(3 yet, but at some point that will be, and I plan for that to be a place where the revenues go to different things. Just because that's really who I am. With a lot of this, like I've donated a large number of my books to, I did a few events here in Austin, and every time I do it, the lady that waits the table, I give her a book, or, random people I give books to and sign them for them. And so for me, that ecosystem is, it's the podcast, it's my IP. I have thousands of hours of IP. It's my events that I host here in Austin. It's the virtual events that I do. It's a lot of different things. My second book is I'm debating when to put it out this year. It's done. It was supposed to be my fourth book. I was supposed to put it out after I exited the workforce, but somehow I got the urge to write it today because of what's going on in our world and economy. And so it's done. It just needs to be edited now. And so that book will come out. And then, I'm still very passionate about the gaming industry. I am, something shifted for me in my soul, in my heart when I got to work with Tribal Gaming. There's something that kind of took over a piece of my heart to love this industry. And, when I first got into gaming, I laughed. I'm like, it's going to be a 1 year thing. Cause what had happened to me is like all these people were like poaching me. I'd get into a job in a year and then someone else would take me. And, and it was kind of one of those things. I was already thinking, well, I'm going to learn something new and I'll probably go back to engineering and get that job. And so I didn't set out to stay, but really working with the tribes and their belief system, it did something special to me. And I guess as an engineer, I have a lifetime of problems to deal with in the gambling industry. And so I think it'll keep my brain and my strategy mind happy forever. But I do, kind of to your point about the kids, it's very scary about cyber with the kids. And aside from the kids, I teach a lot on cybersecurity to senior citizens. I've done several different classes to elderly around Austin and such about what to do in situations. And so I think that they're being hit with a lot of stuff. I just talked to, I would say in the last couple of months, at least five people that have lost $100,000 of their retirement money to some of these fraud, you know, these fraud or social engineering or, phishing campaigns, whatever it is. And so to your point, be diligent. I work in the industry and these emails are good and these perpetrators are good talkers. And so just be wise and smart. But to answer your question, yeah, there's a lot on my mind right now. It's, as we, people depend on AI more. I think there's a lack of community. I also believe there's a lack of community that we're so niched down. It's either a man's group or a women's group or a Democrat group or a Republican group, or you got to be an engineer or you got to be a boater or whatever, whatever the groups are. And I'm not, nothing against any of those groups, but I would say if you lined up all of my friends in a room and you looked at all of them, you'd be like, what? Huh? They're all so different. They're very eclectic too. I have some of my best friends that don't even have jobs. They're stay-at-home moms. And I've have, my son's a mentor of mine, my 4-year-old. But the community I'm building with the Executive Connect is, you know, men and women and all different kinds of political views and people that like gambling and people that, don't know anything about cybersecurity. It's an array of people coming together to learn from people who know a thing or two about a thing or two. And so, I envision that long term is, to learn from people that have been there and done that. And I'll tell you another, when I was graduating college, I, got not a full, like a verbal kind of full ride to a very known college. Um, to go become a patent attorney. And this was before I even got into gaming. And I lived in Reno. And so I had shadowed somebody at IGT and kind of learned a little bit and picked their brain for a day. I knew their wife and I'm like, oh my God, no, I'm never going to be a patent attorney. And so all these conversations and, back to our original point of the story being, me wanting to be a doctor. I shadowed doctors. I shadowed the lives of the ultra, I've known many singers. I've grew up in Vegas. I've met, a number of Eminem. I've met Kid Rock. I've met a number of people growing up in Vegas has that kind of, I guess I had that kind of lifestyle. And looking at their lives and how they show up in the world, it wasn't something for me. Same with medicine. And so back to kind of the purpose, the legacy is, I surround myself with a lot of people that don't agree with what I agree. And I realize the people that are like, yeah, Melissa, that's good. Yeah, Melissa, that's good. I'm not growing from them, right? And so a lot of my friends are often saying, like, what the heck are you doing? Like when I left engineering, like every single one of my friends were like, what are you doing? Um, and I had helped a friend of mine that owned a fur company in Reno, like organize his fur in a season, and I'd helped him with his events while I was working as an engineer. And he was also a very, very good businessman. And I went to him, I'm like, he was the only one that kind of was like, obviously you can do this. And mind you, I was just kind of, he wasn't even like a major mentor. I was just an acquaintance. I helped him, with his fur business. And he was one of the ones that are like, you got this. Like, you're going to do great at this. You grew up in Vegas. You have that in your blood. And I'm like, do I have that in my blood? I do. And so I took the job. And, so I guess what's next? It's hard to say.
But where we are here is now 2026, and I want to make sure that we get my favorite question. Not that I have like preordained questions, but this is the one we like to wrap up with. is to now look back on this past hour we've spent together and look through all of the different things that have altered your path, whether it's something that was in your control or outside of your control, things that we typically call like butterfly effects. If you were to find one specific butterfly effect, whether it was in or out of your control, that led you to where you are today the most, which of all of the things we kind of went through, or maybe something we haven't even covered, is that number one for you?
I think the interesting thing, so I've been managing people for, I don't even know at this point, over 20 years of my life. I've hired a lot of people, I've fired a number of people. Um, and until you have children, you can't understand what it's like to have to get kids dressed in the morning and moving so you can show up to your job on time. So the butterfly moment was definitely becoming a mom. And then definitely having that aha moment. My kids are mentors too to me. I always kind of grew up with that, like, I'm your dad, I know better, I'm your mom, we know better. And not that my parents were arrogant with it, but that kind of like, my parents know best about everything kind of mentality. And I look at it differently. And I don't know if it's kind of, just the different lens or how my kids show up, but the moment was the kids. The defining moment was when the kids started to mentor me. And I wrote this in my second book. I wrote this story in my second book. It was like a huge aha moment. And it was like, I think it was in, I want to say 2021, no, 2022. It was 2022. My son was 2, and I had my phone in my hand, and I was talking to him. He's a very verbal 2-year-old. And he's like, Mom, you're not listening. And I'm like, yeah, 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 I'm listening. But I wasn't. I had my phone in my hand and I was texting and doing other thing. And he's like, Mom, you're not listening. And that moment really switched a lot for me because the kid's right. He was right. I wasn't listening. I was half writing an email, trying to get through the day, and I was half listening to the kid. And I decided, like literally that exact moment, not a moment sooner, that I was going to work my ass off when I'm traveling for work for my, the company I'm working for, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna, put my phone down and put, sit down with my kids and have dinner and listen and talk to them. And that had to be, and not that I wasn't doing that, because I was doing that. It wasn't, but it wasn't like planned. It was more like I was fading in, fading out, fading in, fading out.
Yeah, that definitely that makes perfect sense as being your flagship butterfly moment, getting you to where you are today. So I don't know if I have any more questions. I am just kind of, even though I was here with you the entire 60 minutes, I feel like I'm gonna have so many more questions after this is over, just kind of reflecting on everything that we covered. But that just means there's a lot of good stuff that we were able to get out of your storyline, and I do appreciate you hopping on this episode and sharing your story with us. If somebody wants to reach out to you, whether regardless of it's about the book or if it's about your whole executive connect or something that's not related to any of those, what's your preferred method of contact for them to reach out to you?
LinkedIn, that's where I do a lot. Every Tuesday, Thursday, we drop new videos on LinkedIn. The podcasts also come out 3 times a week as well. There's audio ones, there's video ones, there's webinar ones. There's a lot of really good information about what you're looking to learn. And so go check it out. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear your story and support you as best I can.
All right. Well, thanks again for sharing your story with us, Melissa. If you guys enjoyed this one, you want to listen to other ones, there's a lot of episodes we had before this number 44 one. There's going to be a lot after. So make sure you subscribe to this channel. And thank you guys for tuning in.